Olson.
I'm Jim Olson. I guess I won't say how long I lived here, but it's been a while. Everybody asks you that around in this state. But I've spent, actually I spent most of my life defending the country, the military, and associated activities, and I've had the pleasure of raising my hand to promise to defend the Constitution. It seems like there's some questions on the floor today whether we're really following the processes and giving the people due process. But I really want to talk about community, people, and corporations a little bit. I'm from down in Hamilton, and again, my name's Jim Olson, and by the way, I represent the Friends of the Bitterroot. We have 700 members in Missoula and the Bitterroot Valley. We hold each other responsible for our actions. We're part of a community. We expect people to respect each other. We expect each other to perform a duty to the community. And what we have is a corporation. The corporation only has rights given to it by the people. The legislatures of the various governmental entities in this country have decided to give people who start corporations specific rights. And with those rights comes duties. A corporation enjoys a privileged position in the society. It protects the people that own it from certain liabilities. It's a privilege to do business in a community. In return, they have a civic duty. There is more to being a corporation than profits. There is a responsibility to the community. The corporation CEO is Roger Stone. Where is Roger Stone? He's making decisions that affect this community. Why isn't he here? Why isn't he here to talk to us? He's making we hold each other responsible, therefore we hold him responsible for his decisions. We've heard a lot of evidence, a lot of science, a lot of everything else. The bottom line is the air here stinks. And Roger Stone is making decisions that keep the air in that situation. Roger Stone personally makes enough money to spend a fraction of it to do the right thing for this community, and I and the members of my organization call on him to do just that. If he won't do that, then the state needs, as our representative, to have him do that. We all make a living. We all have to work to make a living, particularly my group, which is all volunteer. I make a living. I have to work full-time to make a living in addition to the work that I do with the group. So I certainly understand the fact that the people that work for Stone Container have an interest in continuing to work for Stone Container. And what I'll say to them, because again, our community, our organization has people that work in the timber industry, is that Stone Container owes them a job if it wants to exist in this community, and it owes the community clean air, and the people that run Stone Container, particularly Roger Stone, have the money to do both and should. Thank you.
I only have one name left. There may be other people that want to speak, so let me know after this next person is up, because that will be the end of my calling out names. Tony Tweedale.
We're doing pretty good here, time-wise. My name is Tony Tweedale. I have been working to reduce Stone Container's emissions. I want to focus most of my comments on the exact issue before the governor today, in that the department is acting more or less on behalf of the governor, who has to approve this SIP change. But first, if I may ask, I asked you briefly, Mr. Madden, would it be possible to get a brief extension of time for written comments?
If you have something in writing, we can let you send it in. What do you have in mind? What could you send?
Not so much I have something prepared in writing. There's a few people who I've talked to tonight who don't have something prepared, and we could submit it tomorrow.
I think that's all right.
I appreciate that. Some of my testimony is going to be from a letter I sent to Gwen Jacobs with the US EPA working in Helena with the air program there. I'm also going to quote some citations from the Code of Federal Regulations which govern SIP changes procedurally. Let me say first that regarding the procedures for approving SIPs, I'll just quote some sentences from the Code of Federal Regulations, 40 CFR Part 51, and I'll refer to the exact parts. 51.243, consultation process objectives. To provide for information dissemination to and education of relevant organizations and individuals, not just the Missoula Pollution Air Control Board. I'm sorry, not just the Missoula Air Pollution Control Board. The state in this case, I believe, is required to disseminate information to relevant organizations and individuals on at least all elements of the state implementation plans identified in 51.244, which includes Section E, air quality maintenance measures. Missoula is currently a maintenance area for particulate matter. 243, paragraph C, provide an opportunity for joint resolution of affected governmental organizations and individuals of key issues in the development of the revised implementation plan. Moving down a little bit in the same paragraph, and determination of responsibilities among state and local governments for implementation and enforcement, particularly where the commitment of local resources will be necessary. Let me just interject. I think part of what I'm saying here is that while I haven't looked at the exact record from talking to parties, it's my understanding that the state made a minimal effort to involve the locality in the SIP change. And this is reflected in the county's lawsuit against the rule. 51.245, organizations and officials to be consulted shall ensure that the involvement of the following organizations or individuals whenever the interests for which they are responsible are directly or indirectly affected. A, state, area-wide, and local agencies. D, any other affected governmental organizations that may be responsible for implementing or enforcing the plan element being developed. 51.247, no, let me skip that, I'm sorry. 51.248, a sentence 3, use where possible of common public participation in information programs. Sentence 5, consideration of other community objectives in development of air pollution control strategies. I don't recall anybody in Missoula that I've talked to, and I've talked to a lot of people about this issue, having been consulted as to what their objectives were in this particular issue at hand. .252, sentence B, I guess, a discussion of any significant comments raised during the consultation process. Well, that may or may not have happened. 15.285, public notification. No, that's not relevant. So I think we get the drift there of what should have been done. I'll just read a few sections from my letter, and I think I may be near done by then. This is my letter to Gwen Jacobs. I sent the letter to her because EPA is the party ultimately responsible for deciding whether this SIP change will go through. Copies of going to the governor, to the local departments, to the state air quality department, all parties that are involved in this SIP approval. I have 6 bullets, reasons why I believe disapproval of this SIP change should be recommended to the governor, and that the governor should recommend disapproval. The agency most responsible for Missoula's attainment, the Missoula Air Pollution Control Board, regards the rule crafted by Stone on air quality in secret without public input to be illegal, and has filed so in state district court to overturn it. It makes little sense to approve a SIP containing a rule that is critical to attainment that is being judicially challenged. Bullet 2, local officials responsible for attainment were not consulted in the development of that rule. Despite having explicitly told the deciding parties, Air Quality Department, Stone Container, that the federal regulations require consultation with them before changes affecting a SIP are made. That's on the record. And by the way, I recommend the parties making this decision to look at 2 particular documents: the county's first amended petition in their lawsuit, and Mr. Russoff's brief in petition for a rehearing after the old board's illegal decision. By the way, the federal EPA is already aware of these documents. We've talked to some people in Denver who are pretty damn familiar with the process that went on during the contested case proceeding and the illegal stipulation. And remember, EPA is going to have final approval on the SIP change. Bullet 3, federal regulations prohibit conflicts of interest in developing and approving SIPs, it's my understanding. And I won't read the rest because Ross Best told you exactly what that issue is concerning Mr. Remington Court, and I believe Mr. Ross Best is correct. The beginning of the process is linked step by step with where we are standing tonight, so you have to consider the beginning of the process and the blatant conflict of interest of Remington Court. Bullet 4, despite having given a preliminary indication that the new rule would meet SIP requirements, it now appears that EPA Region 8 may be having second thoughts. In their federal district court lawsuit using their SIP enforcement powers, EPA is asking a federal judge to issue a permanent injunction to comply with the old 20% state rule. This would invalidate the rule, so why should EPA risk approving a SIP containing a critical but void rule? Now, what do they mean by permanent? I suggest the state, on behalf of the governor, find out what EPA is thinking of when they're asking for a permanent injunction. Bullet 5, the state regulates Stone's recovery boiler particulate using a direct linear correlation equation to convert opacity into mass emissions estimate. I don't have a full understanding of the relationship between opacity and mass emissions, but I do know, at least at one stage, they're making a linear correlation between opacity levels and mass particulate emissions. Given also that Stone has, and this is the same subject, given also that Stone has occasionally violated their mass emission limits, as Jim Carlson pointed out, their mass emission limits are 1,253 pounds a day. The 20% opacity rule is equivalent to a 200 pounds a day emission limit, and yet we have records showing that Stone's own records showing they have occasionally violated their mass emission limit. Given that, given that these limits, the mass emission limits, were derived, as I understand it, from the original SIP's calculations on Stone's maximum allowable particulate emissions, so as not to cause an exceedance of the federal ambient standard to which Stone is a contributing source, It seems that this SIP change will push Missoula in the direction of non-attainment. And if that is so, you cannot approve the SIP change. Nobody can approve it. Bullet 6, last one. Though not a direct factor in this SIP approval, EPA will, under court order, very soon promulgate a stricter particulate standard, which will additionally be based on the particle size that recovery boilers emit and are enriched in, compared to the current 10-micron size that is regulated. Again, why approve a SIP change affecting particulate emissions that will only have to be changed again very soon? In other words, the SIP will only have to be changed again very soon when EPA's new particulate matter standard comes down the pike under court order. Finally, I just want to address a couple things that were said by Mr. Ed Scott, the Mills Environmental Affairs Manager. One, if it's the mass emissions that matter rather than opacity, as he was saying, then why did the stipulation parties, Stone and Air Quality, in secret, but that's not relevant now, agree to reduce the opacity limits of various boilers? I believe strongly there's a direct correlation between opacity and mass emissions. Not necessarily a linear correlation, but a very strong and direct correlation. Second point, regarding the claims of reduced particulate matter under the 6-minute averaging. The idea being, and it's certainly true, that if you take a reading every 6 minutes of what your opacity is, you can feed that information back to the people feeding black liquor into the boiler and control the feed rate and other operating parameters such as temperature to control the completeness of the burn and therefore control the amount of particulate. Well, here's my point. If they had fine-tuned emissions under the old rule, using the old rule's plain language requirement, apparent requirement for 6-minute averaging, what I'm saying is that we've had this 6-minute averaging requirement in the ARM for decades, I guess. I don't know why it wasn't used in the case of Stone and their permit, but if it had been, Stone could have saved the Missoula public much death and disease from particulate matter when they bought the mill 10 years ago. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. What's your name?
Good evening. My name is Jake Krylik, and I'm a campaign coordinator for the Native Forest Network based here in Missoula, Montana. Keep my comments very brief. I'm testifying tonight to express my utter disgust with the preferential treatment given to Stone Container by Montana state agencies responsible for protecting the health and safety of Missoula Valley residents. It is time for the Department of Environmental Quality and the Board of Environmental Review to start the entire process over. The current process is an embarrassment to the state and reflects badly on Montana's ability to maintain a clean and healthful environment for all Montanans. Indeed, the eyes of other states and other countries are following this issue. NFN believes that the state needs to come up with an entirely new rule process to address all the health and environmental impacts from Stone's Mill, particularly regarding air emissions of particulates, dioxins and furans, and the burning of dewatered sludge. The fact that the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and the Missoula Air Quality Board have sued Stone and the state to overturn the Board of Environmental Review's opacity ruling and enforce the 20% opacity standard is a good example of why the current process needs to be scrapped. It is time for the state to look at the full range of public health issues and environmental impacts from Stone Containers Frenchtown Mill. Essentially, Stone is grabbing yet another cookie from the state's corporate cookie jar. Neither Stone nor the DEQ nor the Board of Environmental Review have scientifically substantiated the reasons for amending the SIP, offering those of us in the community with no real information to make an informed decision. Where is the evidence and the data to the EPA to support amending the opacity standard? Nowhere. Such behavior is typical of this flawed process and demonstrates the conflict of interest between Stone and state officials. In conclusion, the Native Forest Network will be voicing our outrage to regional and national EPA administrators, as well as Governor Roscoe, so that they will not authorize a SIP change on this matter. As far as Mr. Smith's audiovisual extravaganza, maybe I'm just really dense, but I didn't see anything in the graphs of the charts to indicate to me why Stone needed the 30% opacity standard, simply arguing that their peak surges doesn't wash in my book. And I suspect the real motivation is that Stone and other companies in the pulp and paper industry want to crank up production while there is an upswing in the pulp and paper markets. I think that the reality of the situation is that often in our country money does talk, but I believe that people are stronger than money and that we will win out on this issue. Thank you.
And Larry Evans? That is the last name I have now, again, so if there's more people wanting to testify, we'll hear from you.
Yeah. Evans, EVNS. And first I'd like to mention that we appreciate the extension of the deadline for written comment. We've got a number here that I will refrain from reading in at this time, and we'll just hand them in, I guess, after we make copies and whatnot. Okay. I think that the important thing to remember in all of these hearings is that, again, what we're dealing with are the social relationships and the social obligations, the responsibilities that both individuals and corporations have as members of the community. As a member of Missoula's community, I've spent a long time burning wood in my wood stove, all right? I was able to go out and get wood and probably heat my house for under $200 a year, Now, feeling, socially responsible, I have gone ahead and now I'm heating with natural gas. Now that cost me about $1,000 easy, for a heating season. And that's a big jump. And I didn't have a rule or an obligation. Nobody, served me with a summons or a warrant to go ahead and try and do something about Missoula's air. And I think that it's tragic, perhaps, I dread to use the word reprehensible, that people have to be dragged, kicking and screaming, into compliance with the law. I'd like to wrap it up by saying that these public comments offer us a chance to reject this current illegal rule and initiate a process of legitimate rulemaking to govern these processes in the future. Thank you.
Any other parties wishing to comment? I would like your name on this sheet, too, if you can give me that now, and then let you go ahead.
My name is Brian Page. I've lived here in Missoula for only a year and a half, but I spent much of that time educating myself about the issues being discussed here tonight, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to participate for the first time in the public debate these issues have generated. I came to Missoula to get a master's degree in environmental science, but I came here also simply to live in this place. I love this valley, and I love the spirit and diversity of its communities. I've come here tonight because I believe that this community, when I say community, I mean the whole community, students, mill workers, county employees, everyone, has the will, the talent, and the opportunity to make a stand here and now against the tide of corporate influence and bureaucratic excess which is slowly overpowering communities and people all over the world. We humans who live in this valley belong here in a way that institutions such as Stone Container and the state of Montana never can. The issue here should be life and quality of life, not power, principle, or money. Stone Container provides a lot of jobs and brings in a lot of money to this valley. Great. But Stone also pollutes this valley. Not so great. Well, I pollute this valley too. The point is that I try to minimize my negative impact on the environment as much as I can, and I expect Stone to do the same. The various owners and employees of the Frenchtown Mill have made great progress in reducing the environmental impacts of the mill's operations. Great. But as far as I've been able to find out, it always requires that the citizens of the valley make a stink as big as the mills for the mill's owners to take the next step in cleaning up their act. So we're making a stink about the number 4 boiler this time around. According to what I've been told, the new renegotiated permit has and will continue to result in lower overall particulate emissions from Stone's operations. Great. What surprises me is that the state and Stone Container thought that the people of this valley would agree that the best way to address the air quality problem was to not only violate the spirit and letter of the law, but to insult the intelligence and creativity of the valley residents by locking us out of the process. The backroom deal between Stone and the state, while it may have resulted in lower emissions, violated the public trust and undermined the credibility of Stone's assertion that it wants what's best for the valley. I believe that the purpose of the process is to make sure all the good ideas out there get considered before a decision is made, especially a decision like this one, which directly affects the quality of life of all the residents in the valley. While we have obviously not hit on the perfect solution, the process we do have cannot and should not be circumvented so lightly. What scares me most about the state's backroom deal is the implication that the state and Stone Container view public participation as nothing more than an occasionally necessary evil. I believe that, given a chance, the people of this valley could have made an important substantive contribution to the drafting of a new permit for the mill. I've got an idea that I would have liked the opportunity to see considered. As far as I understand the situation at the number 4 boiler, Stone gave concessions on the other boilers and on the averaging time in exchange for a higher maximum opacity limit for the number 4 boiler, primarily to lessen the administrative and regulatory burden associated with the transient spikes in the particulate emissions. If, in fact, they are capable of operating at much lower levels than that most of the time, then I would like to see that reflected in the permit as an incentive to keep the mill's regular operating levels of particulate emissions as low as possible. It seems to me that this goal could be achieved by the simple expedient of setting one standard for the 24-hour average, which better reflects Stone's contribution to the airshed's total particulate load, say 10% opacity, and another higher level for the 6-minute average, say the 30% Stone has asked for. This double standard would retain protection both from excessive chronic and acute emissions, and yet still allow boiler operators the flexibility to respond to emergencies without the regulatory overhead. Thanks again for this opportunity to express my opinions.
Chris Baldwin?
Okay, the camera is God. My name is Chris Baldwin. I have reason to believe we will all be received in Graceland. Thank you. Sirs, enclosed you will find a drawn not to scale model of the Earth, in keeping with the misconception that one confines one location on it. I'm sorry. I'm a little excited about this. Sure. Okay, the camera is God. The camera is God. Ronald Reagan got us all. Okay, sirs, Enclosed, you will find a drawn, not-to-scale model of the Earth. In keeping with the misconception that one confines one's location on it, I take then this time to ask you to look around and see the air we breathe. The map is not the territory. Sincerely, Christopher Baldwin. Second letter. Sirs, quickly, this SIP hearing smacks of three basic subversions. Subversion 1, basic local control of regulations. Subversion 2, obvious manipulation of the public's understanding of health risks. Subversion 3, a disgusting slap of corporate elitism in the face of humanity. Sincerely, Chris Baldwin. Letter number 3, my final letter. Sirs, I have a 2-year-old border collie with whom I spent 5 hours a day training for the last year. When I let her out of the house in the morning to relieve herself, this has a point, she comes back with huge mucus buildup in her eyes. Sincerely, Chris Baldwin.
My name is Kari Roche, and all I'd like to say is that I'm very disappointed and disgusted to find that my neighbor, Stone Container, and even my government regard me as less important than the money they receive. Thank you.
Is there anybody else wanting to testify? Comment, not testify. Can I get your name over here? State your name for the record, too. Thanks.
My name is Jennifer Sigmund. I just moved here not too long ago from way down south from Austin, Texas. And it's definitely not a perfect place by far. We know we have a lot of big industry, 3M, Freeport-McMoRan. But there's a big difference. Community comes to mind. I was really environmentally active. And the boards of these large corporations would actually meet with us and hear what we had to say. I know a lot of those guys, you know. I know one of the CEOs of Freeport, you know, personally, because I talked to him, you know, and presented alternatives to him. Not to say that, you know, they got passed a lot of the times, but just the fact that they saw members of the community as important because we're the ones that basically support their industry a lot. Something that really disturbs me is the fact that before I moved up here, I was warned. I was warned by people down there that said Missoula had a major air problem. And I couldn't believe this. The other side of the country, and people know what's going on up here. That says a lot. That it's not necessarily such a local issue, that people around the country are aware of what's going on here in this small place. I just like you to be aware that that's happening, because that's really disturbing, the fact that I was warned about the pulp mill, the so-called pulp mill, before I moved up here. I just wasn't aware of it when I moved up here and started riding my bike and smelled the air and rode up to the South Hills and could look down at Stone and see the cloud hanging over. I didn't have to see it for myself. Other people knew. So I think that maybe that might give you a little perspective. And another thing that disturbs me is I talked to someone today who says he's been trying to work with Stone on this issue for 30 years. 30 years. For someone to give up 30 years of their life on one particular issue, I think says a lot. And the fact that I talked to someone else today who has family members that work for Stone and agreed with me says a lot. So I just like to state that for the record.
Other comments? Can I get your name?
Yeah, My name is Storm, and I want to question whether or not we really want to trust any economic entity that would have us all believe that you cannot have employment and economic stability without an environment full of filth and poison, and vice versa. Especially when you keep in mind the fact that the people that would have us believe that are not only getting fat off the status quo, but don't have to live anywhere near the filth and poison in question.
Hi, my name is Lisa Hahn, and I moved here about 2 months ago, and I'm from Wisconsin, and so I know what paper mills are about. And one of my first days while I was here, I walked outside, and as soon as I smelled the air, I felt like I was back in Wisconsin, and I knew right away that there was a paper mill close, and I didn't even know that there was a mill before I got here, but I could tell just from smelling the air. And so I just want to express my concern. I've heard a lot tonight, and I just want to make my case short and to the point. So, I am outraged by Montana's Board of Environmental Review for acting so irresponsibly in regards to Montana's health and safety. I am in opposition to the board's decision to change the state implementation plan, SIP, for particulates from 20% to 30%. There is no reason why Stone Container's Frenchtown Mill should be permitted to increase pollution and its impacts on health of individuals and of the environment. Montana should stand strong in complying with the Clean Air Act. If this change in ruling is allowed, the door will be open for polluters now and into the future. I challenge and demand Montana to create a new rule, one from which the citizens who live and breathe in Missoula are benefiting, and not a large corporation that wants to increase its profit margin. Thank you.
Other commenters? Not 10 o'clock. Hearing none, I guess we will proceed to conclude the hearing, close the hearing, with the exception that we will leave open through tomorrow, is my understanding, for 2 written submittals. Several. Okay, what I meant was from 2 parties. Sorry. Good. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time and interest, and that concludes the hearing.